Welcome to New Norcia. We're an hour and a half north of Perth in Western Australia. We've come here today to look at ancient Christian symbols and to try and discover the ancient origins or meanings behind them. Even in the simplest and plainest buildings, you can see up on top of this one, there's a triangle and there's three balls, and then even inside the triangle, there's another circle, two triangles coming out. Firstly, the triangle, the number 3, it's all symbolic of the male or masculine pagan symbol for masculinity. Why? Because men have 3 visible male genitalia. It's as simple as that. So you can see how that's been hidden, even in this simple and plain building. Then inside that triangle is a circle, 2 triangles coming out. This is an ancient emblem of the Egyptians for the winged sun, or the supreme deity in Egyptian mythology. So the Christians have incorporated the ancient pagan symbol for masculinity. They've incorporated the ancient Egyptian symbol for masculinity or the supreme creator. Why? To override all the other religions. Let's go and have a look at some others. We're at the front of the original Benedictine monastery here in New Norcia. These are the front gates, and there's a lot of information here. You can see towards the top there's a shield, a crest with some various figures inside that. We'll go and have a look at that in a second. And at the bottom we have a very ornate type of gate. We'll have a look at that too. So the first thing we notice is the very obvious writing UIOGD, which stands for Ut in omnibus glorificata Deus. In English, it means in all things God is glorified. But that's not the real interesting thing here. The interesting thing is below it, the coat of arms, and at the top of the coat of arms we can see a scallop shell. Now, scallop shells are the emblem of Christianity since ancient times, and they're still used today on El Camino in Spain. If you've ever been or want to go on that walk, you'll see the Christians carrying scallop shells pinned to their jackets or their hats, meaning they are pilgrims. So the significance behind the shape and the pink colouring of the scallop shells is because they're suggestive of the vulva. Now, this is associated with the feminine principle and therefore feminine gods, fertility and the cycle of life. The Greek goddess Aphrodite and the Roman goddess Venus both materialised out of the foam of the ocean, and then they were carried ashore on a seashell. If you substitute sperm for foam, vulva for shell, ocean for womb, and then you have a very fitting symbol of sexual union and procreation. So that's the scallop shell for you. Who would have thought? Below the scallop shell we have a flat top priest's hat, and then we have a bishop's mitre hat. Now, the bishop's mitre hat is the fascinating thing here. If you look at very old sculptures, bas reliefs in the British Museum of Assyrian priests, you'll notice they're wearing fish skin cloaks, and they're wearing the fish's head pointing up to the sky on top of their heads, and with a long cloak being the fish skin hanging down behind them. So why did they do this? Why did they do this? The fish itself has many meanings, not only including the feminine principle, because of the amount of eggs that fish lay. They're very fertile, like frogs. They're both feminine symbols. But in this instance, the Assyrian priests are probably copying a relic of the old Sumerian god-man Oannes, who in mythology brought civilization to the Sumerians. Now, the other thing about Oannes is that it's the very first personal name. And we know it today. It's still the most common name, and it is that of John. Jennifer is the most common female name and the very first female name, and that comes from the female goddess, the moon goddess, Inanna from Sumer. Now, back to the fish's head. So, we can see that the fish's head has become the shape of the bishop's mitre hat, which is ringing down through the ages. And we still cling on to that from those very ancient times. We're talking 5,000 years ago, when the first civilizations began. I'd like to talk a little bit about Pythagoras. We all know of Pythagoras' theorem, but not many know that Pythagoras also founded his own Pythagorean religion. Now, according to the Pythagoreans, the greatest number of all is 10, because it reflects in all arithmetic and all harmonic proportions. 10 is the nature of number itself, and therefore it's the number of God. So being a perfect number, it was applied to all those things relating to age, poetry, faith, necessity, and even the power of memory. So we could see on the left and the right of the shield there are some cords hanging down. So we have one end, I guess you'd call it, at the top, and then 2 knotted ends, and then 3 knotted ends. Now they add up to 7, of course, and with Pythagoras's number 10, you would have 4 more knotted ends under that, or even balls. Now that was called the Tetracticus, and very, very particular to the Pythagorean religion. So bishops have taken that and overwritten it with their own symbol. And they have 7 there, because 7 is also a very, very famous and lucky number. We have 7 days in the week, for example. And none of this is an accident. The 7 days originally were Sumerian and reflected the 7 who decree the fates. It also means the 5 visible planets plus the sun and the moon. So 7 has a very, very long history since the earliest times when civilization was founded by the Sumerians 5,000 years ago. 7 is the most holy and sacred and consecrated of all numbers, and has always been so. Many, many cultures, including Sumerians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Persians, Assyrians, consider it to have a special significance. It is indivisible, and it is compared to God. So examples from the Babylonians include the 7 gates of the underworld, 7 evil spirits, 7 stages of the Tower of Babel, 7 tablets of creation, the 7-fold deity, as well as many other examples. Every one of those references can be traced back to one single source. In Sumerian mythology, the seven who decree the fates were the most sacred and powerful of the gods. They were comprised of the very first holy trinity of gods, the Sumerian god An, god of heaven, Enlil, god of air, Enki, god of earth, and in addition was Ninhursag, a mother goddess, and then also the three brightest entities in the sky, their sun god Utu, the moon god Nana, and the Venus god Inanna. The holy and sacred origin of the number 7 originates from Sumer in southern Iraq and dates from at least 5000 BCE. It's no wonder we have 7 days in the week. Just to the left of the bishop's mitre hat, we have a double cross with 2 crossbars near the top. The upper one is shorter, which represents the plaque nailed to Jesus' cross. This special type of cross is called the Crux Gemina. Then below that we have 3 hills. The 3 hills are the virtues, 3 virtues which are traits or qualities which dispose one to conduct oneself in a morally good manner. Traditionally they have been named faith, hope and charity, and they trace their importance in Christian theology to Paul the Apostle. In the upper right corner of the shield we have another cross. Underneath that, the word fides, which is Latin for faith, and then we have a triangle, which is the masculine symbol of 3, or the Holy Trinity, and within that triangle we have the all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye of God, also known as the eye of divine providence, is that symbol of the eye, sometimes surrounded by rays of light and enclosed by a triangle. Some interpret this as symbolising the eye of God watching over mankind. The symbol of the all-seeing eye can be traced back in Egyptian mythology to the Eye of Horus. In medieval Christian symbolism, the all-seeing eye, when depicted inside a triangle, was clearly used as an emblem of the Christian Holy Trinity. Stop. Start again. In medieval Christian symbolism, the all-seeing eye, when depicted inside a triangle, was clearly used as an emblem of the Christian Holy Trinity. Then we come to the swan below that. The swan is a symbol of Western Australia. It's often depicted in the swan below that is a symbol of Western Australia. The swan is often depicted in alchemical texts floating upon waters which represent the womb, the sacred feminine, and or the spirit world. The white colour of the swan is a symbol of purity and light. The term swan song has arisen from the belief that a swan utters its first and last sounds upon its death. Since the swan mates for life, they are also a symbol of fidelity, hence why they are also pictured underneath the words fides. Now if we look at the bottom of the ornate gates, and the bottom half is very ornate, we can see across the middle there are 4 circles with various decorations in them. If we look hard, you can see 8 points to those decorations. This is reminiscent of the 8-pointed star. Now, the 8-pointed star goes right back to the beginning of civilization, when the Sumerians invented cuneiform writing. Now, they had to represent God in some way. Now, the Sumerians believed that every star in the sky was inhabited by a god. So, with their wedge-shaped scribes or pointed sticks, if you want to look at it that way, they would inscribe an 8-pointed star before the name of every god that they wrote down. So the 8-pointed star came to mean God in itself, and it was passed down from the Sumerians to Babylonians to the Greeks to the Romans and on to Western civilization. So that's why we still see everywhere, you start looking hard enough and you will see 8-pointed stars in a lot of Western European decoration or any Western civilization decoration. There's also a lot of 4-petaled flowers. Now, the significance of that, twofold, is flowers are symbols of the stars, so you'll see them all over ceilings, and the 4 petals are symbolic of the cross, 4-pointed cross. So, a 4-pointed cross was adopted by Christians, but it also comes from the earliest times, prehistoric in fact, where the 4-pointed cross is found on Sumerian bowls, Persian bowls, in a lot of prehistoric societies. All it means is the world, the 4 major points, the 4 directions of the wind, everything in the world. So another thing that the Christians have adopted as their own. Behind me is the main church in Norcia. As you can imagine, there's a lot of symbolism going on here. Let's see if we can just quickly look at some of it. On top of the steeple, which is a male symbol, there's a cross. On top of the dome, female symbol, another cross. Triangle above the main door, male symbol. In the window above the doors, we have a symbol of the Trinity, a triangle, masculine symbol, surrounded by a circle, feminine symbol. Even on the doors themselves, the doors are a feminine symbol. So that's why they have ovals and circles on them to represent the feminine. There's a whole lot going on inside the church as well. But first, let's take a look at those crosses. The cross on top of the steeple at the left could also represent a Catherine wheel being imposed upon it. Catherine was also a martyr, and because the Roman Emperor Maxentius, he tried to win her over by proposing marriage. She refused, declaring that her spouse was Jesus Christ, to whom she had consecrated her virginity. Good on her. The furious Roman emperor condemned Catherine to death on a spiked breaking wheel, but at her touch, the wheel shattered. Maxentius then ordered her to be beheaded, but Catherine herself ordered the execution to commence. It is said that a milk-like substance, rather than blood, flowed from her neck. Curiously, we also see a weather vane underneath the cross, showing wind direction and the 4 compass points. This is quite ironic because, as we've discovered, this is the true origin of the cross. So they're pointing it out in a very obvious way in front of us here. If we look to the cross on top of the dome at the right, we can see it is very floral. a flower in the middle of it, what looks like vegetation around the outside of it. So I'm thinking that this is St. Florian's cross. He was born around 250 AD in present-day Austria. He joined the Roman army, advanced in the ranks, and became a commander of the imperial army. Florian organised and trained elite groups of soldiers whose sole duty was to fight fires, believe it or not. Florian got into trouble with the Roman emperor of the day because he was not enforcing proscriptions against Christians in his territory. For this terrible sin, Florian was sentenced to be burned at the stake. But the soldiers would not burn Florian. So instead, and I don't know if it was kinder or not, but they executed him by drowning him in the Enns River with a millstone tied around his neck. So kind of ironic there that Florian became the patron saint of firefighters, and his life was snuffed out by water as well. So walking up to the main doors now, can I just add that even the palm trees along the way to the church are male symbols, long and erect, leading up to the house of the supreme male creator God. So we're inside this beautiful church in New Norcia. And the first thing that strikes me is this beautiful painted ceiling. In the centre of the ceiling is a depiction of the Lamb of God, or in Latin, Agnus Dei. The lamb is a familiar symbol of purity because of the whiteness of its wool. And the Masons, even today, have wool on their apron because of this. In many pagan religions, it has symbolised a coming saviour because of these traits. In Christianity, it's one of the favourite symbols of Jesus Christ. The origin of the lamb as a symbol is at least as old as the Babylonian New Year festival, held around the time of the spring equinox in late March, early April. The newborn lambs were symbolic of the coming year, and hopefully there would be many, many more newborn lambs and other animals born in that year. In the four corners of the mural on the ceiling, we have four very important features. The first one is the bull. The bull is a symbol of St. Luke. Its first use in the zodiac as a calendar dates from at least 4000 BCE. The first sign of the new year was the bull of heaven that we now call the constellation Taurus. Taurus led the zodiacal calendar at the start of the Northern Hemisphere summer. The bull is a powerful, virile creature, a symbol of the masculine principle, as are lions, horses, stags, and even tortoises. Since summer is the most powerful and virulent season, it needed a corresponding symbol. The bull calf was also the symbol of Marduk, the Jupiter god, and the main god of Babylon, and the head of the Babylonian pantheon, or group of gods at the time. It is more than likely that the Hebrews were worshipping the golden calf of Marduk when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments. We move on to the next corner of the mural on the ceiling, showing an eagle. An eagle is a symbol of St. John. Now, the eagle was also a very, very ancient constellation, but due to precession of the stars, the eagle has been replaced by Scorpio in the zodiac. The eagle has represented the sun as early as 3000 BCE in Sumeria. It rose early in the morning, soared high, and then came down at night to sleep, just like the sun did. For many of the same reasons, royalty has adopted the eagle as an emblem to signify their godlike status, their hope for immortality, and their divine right as protector of the people, just like all the previous sun gods. In the third corner, we have a lion. Now, lion is a symbol of St. Mark. The lion is very powerful. It's a solar and masculine emblem due to its power, yellow colouring, and its mane-like sun rays around its head. There's also tradition in ancient cultures, such as the Assyrians, of placing lions on each side of doorways to guard whatever is inside. The Egyptians wore the skins of lions, as did Hercules and Samson, acknowledging and respecting the esoteric powers of the lion. The lion was also a potent symbol of summer, and as such is connected with the constellation of Leo. It ravished and destroyed the countryside with its heat, only for life to be reborn again and return in the spring. Now this rebirth, this cycle of birth, vigour and then death is a constant theme that we find in religion, not only in Christianity but in all religions. The magnificence and the glory of procreation was celebrated and is still celebrated since the dawn of time. In this corner of the ceiling, we see a picture of a man's head surrounded by wings. This is actually a symbol of St. Matthew. And the wings symbolise that St. Matthew, via the Gospel, was a messenger between men and God. Now, it could also represent the constellation Aquarius, just like all the other corners represent a constellation in the sky as well. So why are symbols of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the four writers of the Gospel, placed on the ceiling here in this church in New Norcia? Well, it's a simple reason. They are there to guard the heavens and to rule over the zodiac. It's no coincidence that they are placed at certain points in the zodiac, ruling over certain constellations. They are placed specifically at the four most important times of the year. That is the shortest day, the longest night, and twice during the year when we have equal day and equal night. So midwinter, midsummer, spring equinox, autumn equinox. The four writers of the Gospel rule the skies, they rule the heavens, and watch over everyone. It's as simple as that. We're now inside the church looking back out, and now we can see more clearly the symbols over the door. You remember I stated that there was a triangle a masculine symbol, within a circle, a feminine symbol, symbolising procreation and regeneration. This particular symbol is known as the triquetra. It's a symbol of the Holy Trinity. Now, the world was divided by the Babylonians into three regions: heaven, earth and the underworld. Heaven was then also divided into three regions. The Babylonians also considered three to be a lucky number, as it was said to symbolise birth, death, life, beginning, middle, end, childhood, manhood, old age. Three has always been symbolic of the Holy Trinity as the most sacred masculine gods. An, Enki and Enlil were the Sumerian Holy Trinity, the very first. Anu, Enlil and Ea were the Babylonian Holy Trinity, they followed next. Amon, Ra and Osiris were the Egyptian Holy Trinity. And then last but not least, the Christian God the Father, God the Son and God the Holy Spirit also formed a Holy Trinity. So the triquetra's origin can be found in the very first holy triad to be venerated. So the triad is a masculine symbol because of the three visible sex organs of man. Let's talk about angels, and here's a good example above a doorway in the Church of New Norcia. The word angel is derived from the Greek word angelos, meaning messenger between men and earth. The popular image of angels is of human-like beings with wings, and this has been reinforced by centuries of religious art like this. Sumerian religion can lay claim to being the origin of what we would later call angels. Their representation as winged beings was clearly intended to indicate their ability to fly, just like the gods they emulated. Sumerian gods almost always appeared in a halo of light, like Christian angels or saints, which made men fear and respect them, because they then knew they were in contact with a god. And that light emanating behind them, forming halos, is reminiscent of the sun god. The names of the principal angels all end in L. Have you ever thought about that? So we have Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel, Pharniel, Raguel, and even Sarakiel. El was one title given to the supreme Jewish God in Babylon. His name was Yahweh, or as we know him today, Jehovah. The dove as a Christian symbol is a very frequent occurrence in ancient religious art. According to Matthew 3:16, during the baptism of Jesus, the Holy Spirit descended as a dove and came to rest on Jesus. For this reason, the dove has become a symbol of the Holy Spirit, and in general, it occurs frequently in connection with early representations of baptism. The dove also signifies the Christian soul. The number 801 is both the numerological value of the sum in Greek of the letters of the word dove. So if we convert the Greek letters for dove to numbers, and remember that all Greek and Roman letters are also used as numbers, then dove equals 801. It is also the sum of the value of the letters Alpha and Omega, which refer to Christ. In the Bible story of Noah and the flood, after the flood, a dove returns to Noah, bringing an olive branch as a sign that the water has receded. And this scene recalled to the church fathers of Christ who bring salvation through the cross. This biblical scene also led to interpreting the dove as a symbol of peace. This statue is of St. James the Pilgrim, who is the patron saint of Spain. Now, in the introduction, we spoke about the scallop shells and Christians wearing them on their clothes as a symbol of the feminine principle. So here's an example, St. Francis the Pilgrim from Spain. And guess what I found over here? Why was St. James so important to the Benedictine monks here? Because even though they are an Italian or Roman Christian order, most of the monks came from Spain. So up here, above the window, I have found a little representation of a famous cathedral in Spain. I'm sure that this is Santiago de Compostela, where St. James made his pilgrimage to. And it's now commemorated in many ways, probably as one of the most famous pilgrimages or walks in Europe as El Camino. And this is where you end up in Spain. So here we have a painting inside the church showing another depiction of the Last Supper. What's interesting about this one, especially for Dan Brown fans, is that the person leaning into and underneath Jesus' chin has got to be a woman. I think this because all men in those days had beards. The person next to Jesus does not have a beard. And if you look in the painting, every single person is a male and has a beard except one. So, to my way of thinking, this has to be a representation of a female at the Last Supper, probably Mary Magdalene. What is it about Italian Renaissance painters wanting to picture a female at the Last Supper? What did they know that we don't know today, or we fail to recognise, or maybe it's something we're not being told? Anyway, we may never know, but it's still one of the great mysteries. Here in the church is also the tomb of Father Salvado, the Spanish monk who founded New Norcia. Now, you will notice at the top of his tomb, very top, is a floral decoration. This is known as a palmette, or a small palm. We see this a lot in ancient religions. Now, we'll talk about the palmette later, because on another building we can see an acanthus, and people have surmised that the Byzantines took the Egyptian palmette and turned it into their own emblem called the acanthus. This is a painting of St. Maur healing the sick. Quite a bit happening here. Right in the centre, St. Maur is holding a symbol of the Catholic Church, but this is actually a representation of the sun, or the sun god, and if you count the points around it, you'll see that there are 8, which is also representation of the male sun god. And notwithstanding the halo around his head, again, a symbol of the male sun god. So some of you may have picked up that the four corners of the mural on the ceiling, which represents the sky, are the symbols of the four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. Now, why are they in the corners? The reason is that they're evenly spaced and they're at the major points of the year. Every 3 months we have a major event during the year. We have equal day and equal night twice a year, and we have the longest day and the shortest day. So the reason why Matthew, Mark, Luke and John are in the four corners is to rule over the zodiac, to rule over the sky, to rule over the world, in fact, with God as the centre. Here's an interesting bit of symbolism, one of my favourites, the baptismal font. St. Paul preached that the symbolism of being baptised had three separate parts. Entering the water equals death, being immersed in the water equals burial, and emerging from the water equals to being born again. It makes sense, doesn't it? In early times, the practice of baptism moved from streams and rivers to the indoors, and now to the use of baptismal fonts. So typically, the baptismal font have an octagon at their base. So you can see this one also has 8 sides. That is reminiscent of the 8-pointed star and the symbol of the Sumerian god, the father, who was called An. 8 is therefore the number of regeneration, and most of the old Christian baptistries had a baptismal font with an 8-sided base. See how this number 8 keeps popping up again and again. What an ornate and beautiful ceiling. The decorated circles on the ceiling represent the stars in the heaven, and the major ones represent the sun, the ones that the lights hang off. Nothing is by chance in this church. Everything has a meaning. Behind me you can see the Benedictine College or school. It was run by the Maris brothers and was the main school here in New Norcia. Now, it's a Byzantine style building, but again, even in its very simple lines, you can see masculine and feminine symbols everywhere. All the arches are, of course, feminine symbols. All the spires, masculine symbols. Crosses we've discussed. And even on the pillars, which we'll have a look at in a second, you can see vegetation of a particular plant called the acanthus. Doors and windows, feminine symbols. The solid rods leading up to the spires, masculine symbols. So what they're celebrating here is nothing pornographic or disgusting, as some people sometimes believe. What we're celebrating here is the gift of procreation from God and the everlasting cycle of regeneration. The ancients marvelled at this process. This was indeed a miracle. They couldn't explain it. So it must have been a gift from the gods in the stars above. Hence why we have all the masculine and feminine symbols, celebrating the miracle of procreation. Simple as that. Just a quick word on the acanthus leaves at the top of the columns on each side of the doorway. No one really knows what the acanthus leaves were used for. They stem back to the times of the Greek mystery religions. The acanthus was also found in the Egyptian religion as probably the origin and where the Greeks inherited it from and then passed it on to the Christians. Why it's such an important symbol to at least 3 religions is not quite known. It's definitely a symbol of regeneration, the circle of life, eternity, all that sort of stuff. But it's also probably a male symbol because of the erectness of the leaf. It could also be seen as a female symbol because it looks like a bit like the shape of a vulva. And more importantly, it can be interpreted as a combination of both. In alchemy, they have the god as an androgynous bisexual who all things were born from, which makes sense. If you've got one god, then it has to be a combination of male and female to regenerate. So lots going on there. You can also see other symbols of vegetation there. There's wreaths, holly wreaths, and at the top there another wreath, and it even looks like it could be a rose or a lotus. Rose, of course, when you're looking into a red rose, what does it look like? Yes, it's a feminine symbol. Holly, spiky, green, could be a male symbol. But don't get me started on the lotus plant. Again, Egyptian and the ultimate symbol of regeneration. Why? Because the seeds actually regenerated themselves. They sprouted from the head of the lotus plant themselves, so they appeared to be self-fertilizing and self-generating. So they became in Egyptian religion anyway, and passed on to the Eastern religions probably for the same reason, as the ultimate symbol of regeneration and androgynous procreation. So I hope I haven't bored you too much with that. But it's important to know why you see ivy leaves, you see myrtle, you see oak, you see particularly grapes as a symbol of abundance, regeneration, fertility, again and again. And yet again, there's a reason behind it. They're celebrating the appearance and the abundance of the vegetation and hoping for the coming years that they'll have an abundance of fruit, vegetables and prosperous times. We're in the chapel in the boys' school of Ildefonsonesses, and at the bottom of the altar you can see a symbol looks like an A and an E on its side. Well, this is the Alpha and the Omega. They are the first and the last letters of the Greek alphabet. The term Alpha and Omega comes from the phrase, I am Alpha and Omega, a name for Jesus in the book of Revelation. Therefore he's saying, I am the beginning and the end. In the middle, at the top, is the writing JHS, Jesus Homine Salvator, which means Jesus, the Saviour of man. What we can see in front of us is an avenue of palm trees leading up to St. Gertrude's School. Now, what may not be immediately obvious is that the palm trees are masculine symbols, as we've discovered, but to put them leading up to the entrance of a girls' school, well, I think someone with a religious background had a sense of humour. So now we find ourselves outside St. Gertrude's College. The boys here at New Norcia went to St. Benedictine's Marist Brothers. The girls, they went to St. Gertrude's. St. Gertrude's was run by the Brown Sisters of St. Joseph, founded by Mary MacKillop. This was the first place in Australia where the Brown Sisters of St. Joseph taught. So a lot of historical significance for that order. There's some interesting things on the shields, and at the top I'd like to show you. So as well as all the familiar male and female symbology that we've explored so far, the two shields on each side of the doorway also have some familiar symbols on them. The one on the left has a 6-point tetracetus instead of a 7 or a 10. That's unusual. There's the hill of Golgotha where Jesus was crucified with Pax or peace. There's another hill with Fides written on it, which we've seen before. There's the bishop's mitre, the flat priest's hat. Then on the right we have a shield with a crown at the top. Obvious symbol there. Some feathers. What bird they're from we don't know. It could be pelican, could be peacock. Pelican was a symbol of fidelity because it picked its breast to feed its young, just to keep them alive. The peacock was thought to be immortal because it was thought that its flesh never rotted when it died. There's another hill. There's an 8-pointed star or flower. And there's lots of vegetation there. So some familiar symbols there on those shields. What I want to point out is an interesting cross at the top. The 3-pointed shamrock or clover was said to represent the Holy Trinity, but we know that it is a pagan masculinity symbol of the supreme male creator God. Now, if you found a 4-leaf clover that was especially potent A, because they were so rare, B, it had the Holy Trinity incorporated in it, and C, it formed a holy cross. So a very potent symbol for the Irish indeed was the shamrock. So we're looking at the coat of arms on the right side of the doors to St Gertrude's College, and we can see that there's two hearts with what looks like flames coming out of the top. These are called the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now, the devotion to the Sacred Heart is one of the most widely practiced and well-known Roman Catholic devotions, taking the heart of the resurrected body as a representation of the love by Jesus Christ, who is God. The devotion is especially concerned with what the Church deems to be the long-suffering love and compassion of the heart of Christ towards humanity. The popularisation of this devotion in its modern form is derived from a Roman Catholic nun from France, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. Now we're looking at the shield on the left-hand side of the doorway to St Gertrude's College. And what wasn't immediately apparent before is that there is what's called a crook and a flail crisscrossed behind the shield. The crook and the flail were passed down to Osiris and eventually to the Egyptian pharaohs, in particular Tutankhamun, as symbols of their divine authority. Their use was similar to the popes, in that they were seen as symbolic of herding the tribes of Egypt, as the Pope now herds the Christian tribes. So once again, the Christians have appropriated or overridden symbology from an earlier and more ancient religion. Here we have a beautiful shot of the stained glass windows surrounding the door, the main entrance into St Gertrude's College. At the top, in red and orange, we can see the IHS, Jesus Homine Salvator, Jesus Saves Man. At the bottom in the middle, we can see some sort of Spanish castle, probably where the Benedictine monks came from. And on each side of the door, at the top, we can see the familiar cross, or as we know, the four directions of the compass. And at the bottom is something we haven't yet seen, which is the French fleur-de-lis. Now, the French fleur-de-lis, as you can see, has 3 points, and that is obviously going to be a masculine symbol, a symbol of the male triad, or the great male god. At the bottom of the stained glass window, we can see a typical fleur-de-lis below the cross. As some of us will know, an emblem of the French monarchy, flower of the lily in English, and it became a symbol of royalty because it is a symbol of the male triad, the great masculine creator. So it became associated with power and royalty. And also this is carried right through to the emblem for the Prince of Wales, which has 3 ostrich feathers, which has replaced the fleur-de-lis. So we can see the symbol of the male triad echoing right down through the ages to the present day. We're looking down the avenue which leads up to St Gertrude's College. So what do we see here? We see lines of palm trees that would have originally come from the Middle East, ancient Egypt, Sumeria, Babylonia. Once again, you can see now immediately that these palm trees are symbols of the male masculinity. And not only that not many people realise that when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, people threw the fronds from palm trees beneath his donkey's feet. Why did they do that? Well, it's symbolic of paying homage to the sun god. And Jesus was seen as a sun god. He was seen as a saviour. He was seen as a replacement for all the previous sun gods. There must be at least 3 figures of Madonna and the Child in the museum here at New Norcia. The earliest known figure of a woman breastfeeding or nursing a child is a terracotta figure with painted bands around the neck, waist and wrists. This figure was found at the archaeological site at the Sumerian city of Ur and dates from around 4500 BCE. The Egyptian goddess Isis is sometimes shown with her son Horus in her arms. Strangely enough, Isis was a virgin mother who gave birth to a son and god, whose father was the head of all gods. Isis appears to be the precursor for all the Christian Madonnas depicted nursing a child. This is an interesting statue. We can see what looks like the Madonna, but what's interesting is what she's treading on, the serpent. So here we have a classic case of good stamping out evil. The serpent is a classic male, probably the ultimate phallic symbol, a symbol of masculinity. So the innocent, pure virgin is stamping out the evil, debased male symbol. Good defeating evil, in other words, because we cannot appreciate day without night, beauty without ugliness, so therefore we have to have evil to appreciate goodness. That's what this statue is trying to tell us. The serpent as a symbol has been with us from day one. He was in the Garden of Eden, which is interesting because on the 6th day God had created everything and he saw that it was good. So where did the serpent come from? He must have created it. And they're telling us that it's not good here. Not good at all. So a little bit of a contradiction there. And also Jesus said to the apostles, you must be as wise as serpents. Where did that come from? Probably because Jesus thought that the ancient religions were very wise, that worshipped the male god, and the serpent was a symbol of the great male creator in times gone by. But we'll never really know for sure, will we? Look at this. It's a piece of ornamental art called a monstrance. Now, in the Catholic religion, if this not has been taken from the great sun gods of the past, I don't know what has. A mirror in the centre representing the sun itself, and then all the rays coming out from it. a classic piece of religious art overwriting previous religions. Fourth most important amongst the original Sumerian creating gods, after An, Enlil and Enki, the Sumerian Holy Trinity, was the mother goddess called Ninhursag, or the Queen of Heaven. She was the wife of An and regarded as mother of all living things. She appears to be a remnant of the great mother goddess concept stemming from prehistoric times. Most Christians regard the Virgin Mary as Queen of Heaven and the Mother of God. So she not only fulfills a maternal role, but is often viewed as a protector and mediator for humanity. And here she is, pictured in the museum at New Norcia. A great example of a bishop's mitre hat, showing how it originated from a fish head. The Assyrian priests wore fish head cloaks. The bishops still carry on this tradition. The two tails hanging off the bottom of the bishop's mitre are the last remnants of the full-length fish cloak worn by the Assyrian priests, complete with scales. Is this a simple cup or chalice? No. It's another feminine symbol. A cup is like a womb. A womb is the ultimate feminine symbol. So even simple cups and chalices can be regarded and are regarded as feminine symbols, as a representation of the great feminine gods of ancient times. That's about it for now. Hope you can join me next time on Ancient Origins. Don't forget, you can find my book, Ancient Origins by Robert Dehoy, on Amazon. And also, if you type Robert Dehoy into YouTube, you can find other videos, particularly one about voodoo in West Africa, which I think you might find a little bit interesting. So until next time, please come and visit me again on YouTube, and I look forward to sharing some more secrets with you. Thanks.